Hey guys, welcome back. The final episode of the Halo TV series has finally premiered, and now, for those of you who haven't been following me on either Twitter or my Discord, I haven't really been making any new videos from the Halo TV series after episode 5 because, well, there wasn't really any Covenant topics to go over. Maki was embedded within the UNSC, and there wasn't really much to go on with the elites, the prophets, or any of the other Covenant races. So to save everyone else the trouble, I just decided not to make any videos until we actually got some Covenant scenes. And luckily, we finally got them. And for those of you who haven't been paying attention to my social media, you'll notice that I had some very strong words to say about the following episodes after episode 5. Chief and Maki's relationship developing, the Quan-focused story in episode 7, and worst of all, the sex scene that we got in episode 8, and that fight scene between Vanek, Riz, and the Master Chief. I mean, that episode last week was just an utter bombshell, and I honestly don't want to talk about it anymore. But finally, we get a conclusion with the Covenant arc, Maki, the Chief, and we finally get to know about the Keystones, as well as other stuff regarding Dr. Halsey going rogue, and all that drama between Miranda and Keyes. So without further ado, let's break down episode 9, Transcendence. Now in the opening scene, we pick up right where we left off. Maki was being interrogated by Admiral Parandowski and Miranda Keyes after discovering that she was the one who attacked the Gladius in episode 3. Maki touched the Keystone and evaporated the head of one of her guards and escaped with the Keystone. Maki kills one of the UNSC Marines and holds another one hostage as he takes her to the Covenant Phantom that was stolen by Silver Team in episode 1. As Kai is dealing with Dr. Halsey as she prepares to leave Reach, Chief and the rest of Silver Team move in to stop Maki as she flies away with the Phantom. They're unsuccessful, and Maki takes the Keystones to the Covenant Holy Planet. The planet Maki takes the Keystone to is a planet called Roscoska, and it's located in the Aspero system. Now for those of you who don't know, the Aspero system is the home system of Heshtoros. This was the birth world of Julian Dama's Covenant faction in Halo 4, and after Julian Dama's death, his zealots continued to worship the Forerunners as his Covenant did. But from what was shown in this episode, it doesn't appear that this planet is Heshtoros. More likely, this is a new planet that is introduced in the Silver timeline. Maybe 343 can add it as a new moon of Heshtoros, or maybe it can be its own planet altogether. We'll have to wait and see. Moving on to the next Covenant scene, we have Maki arriving at the Covenant Temple with the Phantom and the Keystone in tow. And here, she's greeted by a retinue of Sangheili honor guards accompanying the Hierarchs. And let's just talk how gorgeous these honor guards look. They just look perfect as Silver Timeline honor guards. I just absolutely adored them, and I'm curious to see why we didn't see them in High Charity during episode 1, 2, and 3. If you remember, the guards that were accompanying Mercy, they wore basic combat harness. It's unclear why this change happened, but I'm glad we see honor guards entirely in this episode. Now with Maki presenting the magical Keystone to the Hierarchs, Mercy congratulates Maki on completing her mission. Though one of the Hierarchs is disappointed to know that the demon's head isn't delivered as well, as she promised in episode 3. And here we get confirmation that the Hierarch in the reddish robes is in fact the High Prophet of Regret. This makes some sort of sense, given that this Sanshayum looks younger than the other two. Though I am very disappointed that he looks pretty much nothing like he did in the core canon. In the future, I would appreciate if they made the Hierarchs resemble more like their core canon counterparts. But that's just me. As Mercy announced that the Covenant will soon be embarking the Great Journey, Maki asks if she will be a part of it as well. Mercy reassures her that there will always be a place for the Blessed Ones, if that's what she wants. She reaffirms her beliefs, but she hides the wounds she made when removing the Covenant nail in episode 8. Now this appears nothing new given to what we've seen in the previous episodes, but in the next scene, as Maki is preparing to wear her Blessed One outfit, we get a conversation between Regret and Mercy. Now in their conversation, they confirm something that I was theorizing with since before the series released, that the prophets are simply using Maki to access the keystones. Once they unlocked it and locate Halo and begin the great journey, she, along with the rest of her race, will burn. With all the retcons and changes made in the show, I'm so glad they decided to keep the Sanshayum as a lying, manipulative race, using other species to their own ends. Now moving on, as Silver Team's Condor reaches the Covenant planet after navigating through a black hole, thanks to Chief's Blessed One abilities, I guess, they drop down on the surface of the planet and crush a sleeping Ungoi. I'm so glad they decided to keep the sleeping grunts. To quote Hidden Xperia, it's just iconic. Now with all Silver Team on the ground, they quickly eliminate the Ungoi guards, with Vanek knocking out one of the Ungoi's breathing mask. I mean, brutal. And it's a good callback to the old days of Halo 3, Reach, and so on and so forth. Once they eliminate the guards, they secure the area and proceed to the temple. Now let's stop here. I really love the Sangheili architecture used in this area. I love the pillars with the Sangheili statues, as well as what we saw in this main temple area. It's a great callback to Halo 5 statues, and I just love the Halo 2 anniversary inspired elites in the statues. And for the main temple, it's interesting to see the Forerunner glyphs here. I believe these glyphs can be found mostly on Huragox in Halo 3 ODST. And I believe there are other glyphs from Halo 5, but I can't think at the top of my head what exactly they are. Regardless, it just all looks great. Moving on to within the temple, Maki and the other hierarchs are preparing the ceremony to unite the two keystones. The prophets give out a holy sermon, and one of the honor guards takes the magical keystone and unites it with the Eridanos 2 keystone. Once that happens, both Maki and Chief go into a trance. While this is happening, an Ungoi guard notices Chief and alerts the hierarchs of the demon. Regret blames Maki for summoning the demon to this holy place, though Maki denies this. As the hierarchs hover over the chamber and Maki is lured away, Mercy deploys an army of zealots against the Spartans. As Kai is dealing with the Sangheili honor guards, Silver Team hears roars of legions of Sangheili as they approach the temple. As Chief and Riz move in on the temple, they are ambushed by Jiro Hanai. And these guys just look absolutely amazing. You can tell that their armor, or at the very least their helmets, were inspired by Halo Infinite. I definitely got a Scrap Cannon Chieftain vibe from these guys. And it's super gratifying to see them carry both spike rifles and gravity hammers, though the former looks a bit big for the brutes. As Chief and Riz fight off the brutes, Maki watches from a distance, and another Jiro Hanai leaps down from the roof. This is in fact the same brute that ambushed Chief on Eridanos 2, and according to the Sangheili script in episode 5, this brute is none other than Atriox. And that definitely makes a whole lot of sense. He looks nearly identical to his core canon counterpart, and the fact that he kicked Chief's ass in the previous episode definitely makes a whole lot of sense given to what we saw in Halo Infinite's opening. But I digress. Moving on, Riz tries to confront Atriox, but as Atriox always does, he kicks the absolute shit out of Riz and leaves her in the dust. And here we get one of my favorite fight scenes in this episode. Chief is fighting off against a dozen Jiro Hanai in a perfect Halo score in this entire fight scene. We get an iconic and badass version of the original Halo theme. I just love it, and I cannot get enough of it. Now as Chief is dealing with the last of the Jiro Hanai, he confronts Atriox, and as always, Atriox kicks the absolute crap out of him and pins him down to the floor. As Maki watches Atriox crush Chief with his gravity mace, she decides to touch the keystone. The energy wave knocks Aatrox out, along with the rest of the Sangheili warriors ambushing the Spartans. And here we see the keystones mapping out the location of the sacred ring, Halo. Now, by judging what we've seen here, it stands to reason that the keystones act, in a way, like the luminary Regret found on Meridian in Halo 2 Anniversary's terminals. That luminary showed the location of Halo and the Ark. And while it's unconfirmed that the Ark is in the Silver timeline, it does appear to be showing the location of Halo. Now, as Maki is touching the keystone, Chief is also entranced by the vision of the Gene song. Here we see Chief and Maki on a Halo ring. Whether or not this is Installation 04, 3, Zeta, or any of the other Halo rings that we haven't really seen thus far, is unconfirmed. As Chief is trying to convince Maki to release them, the Covenant ambushes Silver Team and they quickly get neutralized. Kai's the last one left and makes the hard decision to shoot and kill Maki. This saves Chief, but they are continuously ambushed by Covenant soldiers, with an Ungoy sticking a plasma grenade on Riz's shoulder. Despite Kai's efforts, the grenade goes off and it really does some damage to Riz. I mean, her shoulder is open. Ugh. Now, as Chief is faced with the dilemma of both saving Silver Team and recovering the artifacts, he decides the only way to save both is to allow Cortana control of his body. He runs out into the open and gets mowed down by Covenant soldiers and takes a shot at Aatrox. As he wounds the Jiro Hanai's face, he tells Cortana to find the Halo and win the war. Aatrox slams down his mace on Chief, and as he lies dying, Cortana finally takes control of his body, and here we actually get more Master Chief moments in Chief than we got from John. He mows down Covenant soldiers with dual plasma pistols, and he takes the artifact and saves Silver Team. Hell, Cortana takes control of the Condor that they came in and takes a shot at Aatrox. Whether or not this Jiro Hanai is dead or not, it's left to be decided. But in my book, if you don't see a corpse, then assume he's just wounded and willing to fight another day. Now, as the Condor mows down remaining Covenant troops, Fennec and Kai takes the wounded Riz onto the Condor, while the Cortana-controlled Chief takes the artifacts without activating them. If I have to make one complaint about the story writing here in this scene, it's you have a clear shot at all three hierarchs. Why didn't Cortana take a shot at any one of them? To me, that's just lazy writing, and it's just another reason to keep the hierarchs around. But regardless, Silver Team makes off with the artifacts, and Silver Team leaves the planet. And that's the final episode of Season 1. Overall, the Covenant scenes were great, the fight scenes were absolutely spectacular, but my only major complaint is the writing here. My only real complaint about this episode was the ending. I mean, Cortana is now in control of Chief's body, and he seems more like his core canon counterparts with Cortana on the reins. That's not exactly a bad thing, mind you, it's just there's no real consequences seen in this scene. And frankly, that can be said for the entire episode. Sure, the Keystones have been recovered by the UNSC and the Covenant haven't found Halo, but what have they accomplished? With Cortana now in control of John's body, she can't connect to the artifacts either. So in reality, it's just a stalemate now. The Covenant don't have Maki to access the artifact, and the UNSC doesn't have anyone to access the artifact. I don't know. It just seems like nothing was really accomplished in the end. But that's just my thoughts. I would give episode 9, Transcendence, a 7.8 out of 10. It was honestly one of my favorite episodes in the entire series, with episode 1 as my first and episode 5 as my third. Now with that out of the way, let me give you guys my general thoughts on the first season in general. Overall, it was pretty enjoyable to watch. The Covenant scenes were absolutely spectacular. They were honestly my favorite in the show altogether. And the fight scenes were just absolutely spectacular. That being said though, There's a lot of criticisms I have for this series. My biggest complaint is that they retconned way too many things in this series. The biggest change I cannot tolerate to this day is Reth. I said this before in episode 2, but you cannot have a character from the Cult Protocol, Reth, a Kigyar leader, a human, a crazy POW human. I mean, if you have to make a human character, sure, fine. Name him Bob or Alex or Dave. Don't name him after a Kigyar character. And another of my biggest complaints is the Chief and Maki relationship. Like, I was fine with Chief not trusting Maki, but being somewhat friendly to her as the show moved on. But in episode 8, they made them lovers. I've seen some argue that the relationship between Maki and Chief was to make sure that Chief wasn't alone anymore. Guys, the core canon has done that before in the past. You can have Chief have companionship. He had that with Blue Team, Cortana, and other characters. What they didn't have is some mindless romance. The closest female character Chief has ever known was Cortana, and never did he consider her a romantic interest. He only thought of her as his friend. That's it, nothing more. And my last major complaint, this show is supposed to be set in the middle of the Human Covenant War. The year is 2552, and in core canon, that was when the Covenant War was at its zenith. Most of the human outer colonies were gone, the inner colonies were on the brink of collapse as well, and the fall of Reach was inevitable. But in here, it doesn't give off a vibe that the Covenant is closely approaching. From where I stood, the Covenant seemed like a distant threat, almost like we're in the beginning of the Human Covenant War. And so, with that in mind, I will give Season 1 of the Halo TV series a 6.9 out of 10. It's very entertaining to watch, without a shadow of a doubt. But in my opinion, there's a lot of poor decisions going on with the writing elements in this story. And like I said, in the end, I felt like nothing was really accomplished. I genuinely hope that with all the criticisms given to the show thus far, that the showrunners will make strides to make improvements for Season 2. But in the end, that's just my opinion. As always guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, and if you want to see more Covenant content in the future, hit that subscribe button and get notified for more videos. I'll see you guys when Season 2 comes, but until then, may the eyes of the prophets watch down upon you all. Victory to Clan and Kin, Covenant fans. Covenant Canon, out.